In John chapter 15, Jesus says some really interesting things about being the vine. And so today we have the privilege to go and talk to the owners of a Grapevine Nursery to see if we could discover more about what that means. Morning.
Morning. Good morning.
Good morning. Well, listen, I'm here with Eckhart and Ben Kazakamp. They are the owners of Knight's Grapevine Nursery. Can you tell us a little bit about what you do here?
Well, what we do is we graft grapevines, sell them to the vineyards and wineries, to the industry. So we are specialized in grafting, not in the natural vines.
Okay.
The way we did it before the grafting came along. So, and if you want to know a little bit about the grafting or so, why we graft, then, let's get right into it.
Okay.
The main reason is the phylloxera that attacks the natural, which we call the own-rooted vine, and the grafting, which is a wild rootstock, grows along creeks and stuff, and has been found here in America, brought back to Europe for breeding, and now we have really solid rootstocks where we can graft on, and those rootstocks cannot be attacked by phylloxera. So, the industry can't be wiped out thanks to the rootstocks that we do have.
Nice.
And the rootstock will protect us from what I mentioned before, that the phylloxera can't attack it.
Okay.
And, kill the plant, kill the vineyard, which, we just found out in Washington, the state of Washington is 90% natural. And they always go to want, it's not going to work, but, the end is coming.
Okay.
So good for us, not so good for the
Right.
grower itself, so we can sell more plants.
All right. A little bit more. What are we looking at out here behind us? What are we?
We're looking at a nursery field that was planted this spring.
Okay.
We have grandson cultivating there. I think we should go and check if he's doing it all right. So always nice to have 3 generations already going
Right.
in the same field here. So, but back to the vines, we're looking at what we grafted this spring, planted in May. We're going to leave it here in the field until dormancy,
Okay.
which is sometime November, December, when all the leaves fall off.
All right.
And then we take it out and go through the process of grading and, storage and then shipping in the springtime.
So all these grapevines that we're looking at have already been grafted onto different rootstock, and then you're just letting them sort of grow here, join together, or have time to...
That is correct. Ben just pulled out a plant. He destroyed 4 bucks for us, but will be well worth it.
You'll reimburse me, right?
The grafting is right here. We're going to see that later in the barn. But this is where the rootstock and the budwood join together. It's a very, very solid graft, but still, you see, green.
Okay.
Still has to mature, which is going to come with the dormancy in the fall.
I see.
So, but this has been a good plant. Roots are coming nice. Yeah, and of course here good shoots coming. And also, we talked about dormancy. When you mature, you see the wood, the brown.
Okay.
Yeah, which is all important for us. And these are the new buds that will push later in the vineyards the following year.
Nice. So once you have the sturdy rootstock, and then you identify, the quality of the grape that it is that you want to produce, you've got to join them together. So Ben, explain that part of the process.
Yeah, so that's, I think, is the heart of what a Grapevine Nursery does, is we have to join these 2 pieces of wood together. So this here is what we call our rootstock. So it's kind of bred or programmed to make certain roots that are, like we talked about in the field, that are resistant to the phylloxera that's in the ground. And then we have to match it up with the budwood And this is the variety. This can be your white wine, red wine, Chardonnay, Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, whatever variety you're looking for, the flavor of the plant.
Right.
And that has to be joined with this. And we do that in a process called grafting. And this machine is called, it's a German machine that has a special cut. And this machine right here is called Uno machine because it does the whole thing in one step. So it's really efficient. Because generally speaking, the ladies that do this work, they're able to use their fingers a little better and can join it a little quicker. They do about 5,000 of the process I'm going to do per day. So this is a pretty, quick moving thing, but it's important that they do it right. So what we do is we lay what we call the budwood, the flavor, the variety, and then make sure it's straight. And it joins it together in what we call a jigsaw puzzle kind of format. Again, the rootstock self-explanatory, make the roots that bring the nutrients from the soil up to the budwood that's above. That's making the fruit, but also making the leaves. So these things work together. So in the summertime, the leaves are photosynthesizing, making energy that gets kind of stored in the roots, or making more leaves or making fruit. In the wintertime, all this energy kind of goes down into the roots and it's stored there. So the next year, all the energy comes back up and this thing can start again and do the whole process again. And yeah.
So there's a certain way that it's lined up so that that sort of communication happens.
Yeah, so what's interesting about grapevine, I think is true for all grapes or vines, is there's a bud here, there's not one here, but it's on the other side. It's the same thing, so they keep alternating on here. So when I graft, I make sure I follow that same pattern. And then it's also important that these two areas line up as best as possible. Because this connection here, if this lines up properly, then I can make a good union and I can have a strong, healthy vine down the road. If this thing is off like this, then I'm not going to have a good contact. And this side might callus and this side won't, and then it won't be a good, healthy vine down the road. So I have to make sure that this matches up as closely as I can.
So this part of the process is key to the joining, but they're not truly growing together yet. What is the next phase of this process?
So the next phase in this process is that we need to protect this fresh cut. So grapevines have a tendency, up here you'll see it's kind of brownish. Grapevines will die back. They don't really heal themselves. They just kind of have a thin layer that dies. Once I make this fresh cut, I have now fresh exposed wound on the plant. So the first step I have to do is I wax this to protect it so that the air can't get in here and this delicate part of the plant doesn't dry out. And then I put this vine in a very warm room, 80 degrees Fahrenheit and high humidity, and that simulates spring. And that tells the plant it's warm, I need to start activating myself. And that process starts this kind of seeking out, this one trying to join up, and that forces these two pieces to grow together through a layer of skin called the cambium layer. And those two start joining. Once they join, then they differentiate into the xylem and phloem, which is what moves nutrients and water throughout the vine. And then these roots stimulate the bud up here to grow, and then you start having the circulation because they're moving back and forth. And that's important for the plant to be able to communicate and move things around so it can be a healthy, strong vine. So this wax is also specially formulated for our industry.
Okay.
And this is actually, the guy who makes this is from Norway, and he makes it in Holland. So we purchase it from Europe in the container and bring it this way, but it's designed for this specific process. And it needs to be flexible enough that as this starts maturing and making the callus, it can bend and it can expand without cracking, because you want to keep it dry. And then this wax also has a little bit of hormones in it that'll help stimulate this growth to occur. So it's kind of doing two things. It's A, protection, B, stimulating to make sure these things do want to grow. And it's also, it can't be too hot because I have a bud up here. If I make this too hot, I can burn the bud. If it's too cold, then I'll have too thick of a layer and it won't be able to breathe, it won't be able to push itself out.
Okay.
So it has to be just the right temperature and then it just seals itself like that. And that is now a sealed unit and can go to the next stage in the process.
Nice.
You know, it ended up most likely drying out. So this is a stage, this is about 3 weeks into the process.
Okay.
So this black that you see around here
Whoop.
was initially white, which was the callus. But it didn't end up taking, or it didn't end up surviving the original, the shock of moving into the greenhouse, or it ended up collapsing and it died on itself. But this is beginning, this is this one. And then if we take one that's actively growing, you'll see that same, you know, the graft area right there.
So this is the callus that grows,
the callus.
And this is from the roots. The callus is the rootstock that's growing up.
Correct. They're both, the rootstock and the buddard are joining through what we call a callus material.
Okay.
So they're both kind of trying to find each other and make that connection. And once that connection, you have the roots that are communicating, and you're going back and forth between the vine, bringing the water and nutrients that it needs to grow between this area here. And once in this area, you know, it used to be white, and then as it hardens, it becomes this black color, but underneath it'll still be kind of fresh green, and that's still a fairly actively growing stage for this callus.
And now it's starting to actually produce a vine that's growing off.
Correct.
Of it.
Yep. Yeah. So this vine here, at this stage, could be planted into vineyard, and then in 3 years, this can produce a crop. So part of the tricky part that we have is, because this is a fairly delicate stage, is we can have what we call, I guess, a false callus. So everything looks good and it all looks healthy, but if I put any pressure on here, it'll snap off. When it snaps off, we'll look, and I have a few examples where you'll see it was only 0.25% grafted. The only way, if I don't do that pressure test, the only way to really discover how good this callus is once this vine has to make a fruit.
Right.
Once it has to rely on the rootstock more than itself, then you'll know whether or not this connection is good.
Okay.
And the only way to know that is once the crop in 3 years has to hold up a fully developed vineyard with grapes on it. And if this is not strong, it'll collapse at that stage, and we'll get a call in saying, hey, the vines you delivered were no good. The callus didn't make it. But at this stage, everything looks fine. So it's kind of a tricky process for us to really deliver a good quality plant, because we really have no way of knowing until I destroy it if it's good or not.
Okay. So there's one way to know if this is truly taken. It's not just the leaves that are growing, it's actually when it has to bear the weight of the fruit.
Correct. Yep.
And then if it's not properly joined, it will just...
Because you're not joined to the rootstock, so the rootstock can't push the energy through to support the grapes that are hanging there, the fruit that you're trying to make. And that's critical, because if you don't have fruit, this vine is worthless. This one looks really strong and healthy, and it looks on the outside like it has a good connection. But if I break it, you'll see that it was less than 50% of it.
Oh wow! Can you...
was good there.
So this green part was the only thing that was actually connected. The rest of it was all dead.
Was all dead.
And so when it was time for the fruit to come, this would just fall right off.
Correct. It would collapse. It would die in the vineyard. So at this stage, again, it looks like a really strong, healthy vine. But the minute this thing has any pressure or has to produce, it collapses. And so again, for us, that's the critical point of having a strong, healthy union, is because you don't want that to happen.
That was amazing. So just to recap, there are grapevines and fruit that is produced that's highly valuable, but susceptible to disease and infection. So they join it to a sturdy rootstock so that it won't get infected, it won't be diseased, and they'll be able to produce the fruit that they're looking for. So then they join the grapevine to the rootstock. And that means in order for that joining to happen, that both of them have to be cut. You know, when I think about in the context of the covenant that God has made with us, of course we see with Abraham and all the way through Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and with Moses, that covenant of cutting that was literally, you know, in the bodies of those who were following after God, in that covenant of circumcision. But I remember so many times the prophets would come to the people with a message that says, look, it's not about ripping your garments. It's not about the cutting of the flesh. It's about a kind of cutting that happens in the heart. In fact, you see that in the New Testament as well, where they say, look, it's the circumcision, it's the cutting that takes place in your heart that truly matters to God. And when I think about that cutting part of the process, you know, Jesus says, I'm the true vine, right? I'm the real vine. I'm the pure vine. And the Father is like the gardener who comes in, he cleans out all the stuff that needs to go. And he says, abide in me and you'll bear much fruit. But see, there's a joining that has to happen. That joining, that cutting that happens, it reminds me of when Jesus was on the cross. And it says that one of the soldiers, after Jesus had given up his life, took a spear and he shoved it up into the side of his body, and it pierced his heart. And it says that blood and water flowed. And, you know, that makes me think that, you know, the place where Jesus was cut was in his heart. And that's the place where I think each one of us has to allow the truth of God's word to come in and to pierce and convict us, because that's the place where we join with the life of God. It takes place in our heart. And then it says that Ben was showing us that after that cutting and joining takes place, that they dip it in the wax to seal it, to protect it. And of course, you know, while he's talking about that, all I could think of were, you know, all those passages in the New Testament where it's described that we have been sealed with the Holy Spirit, that we have been like enveloped in his presence to protect that work that God has done in us. And Ben was saying that the stuff that they use has stuff in it that helps to stimulate that growth to happen. And that's what the Holy Spirit is doing in us. He's surrounding us, he's protecting our hearts, and allowing that life to kind of prompting those things to happen in us. The Spirit is leading us. And then, oh my goodness, the demonstration of when you actually know that the graft, the joining has taken place. You might not know it for 3 years in the process of the growing of the plant, but when you know is when the vine has to bear fruit. It has to support the weight of what's being produced. And if that joining hasn't happened, it's going to collapse because it wasn't properly connected. He was talking about that conversation, that communication that's happening between the rootstock and the vine. And the purpose of that, or the result of that, is to bear fruit. And the only way to tell is when pressure has been applied. Man, that was a great piece of truth right there, because it's when the pressures of life come. It's not when things are always easy, right? That sometimes we think, oh, well, you know, things are going well in my life, so God must be happy with me, or, you know, we sort of gauge it by the external. But the real test of whether that connection has happened is when the pressure comes. And when that pressure is applied and we remain in Him, then we know the true connection has been made. That was a fantastic demonstration of all of those truths. Thanks for watching, and I hope you took something away from being over at Knight's Grapevine Nursery.